Good morning. So today we're getting into the 1700s and we're beginning by talking about Rococo. And that's a little tricky because the boundaries between the Baroque style, which we've talked about, and the Rococo style occasionally blur, to be perfectly frank. And you'll find art historians sometimes arguing if something's a little more late Baroque or a little more Rococo. But we're going to try to do our best to explain why we don't just call all the Rococo late Baroque, what those differences are. I also want you to think about this movement, since we are an art history class, in terms of what's going on at the time period. In the 1700s, we're beginning to see more and more of what's known as the scientific revolution, and we're beginning to see a more scientific approach to government with what we call the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment in Europe is all of these thinkers that are going to influence the founding fathers as they ultimately, in the late 1700s, create the United States. And it's also going to influence the thinkers who will create the French Revolution in the late 1700s, just after the United States is created. The economy begins to collapse by the late 1700s in a number of countries, like France, which will be deeply in debt. There's this sense that things are more and more, notice our title, excess on the edge of revolution. It's almost like they're partying away what is beginning to seem like a decadent way of life that's not going to last. So instead of thinking about reforming things, it's almost like ignoring the coming downfall. There was a biography of one of Marie Antoinette's attendants called Dancing Towards the Precipice, and that's probably a good description of the Rococo. There's a lot of stuff being ignored. People of different social classes. We're ignoring economic disaster. We're ignoring the global empires that are founding a lot of the wealth being spent in Europe, with the exception of weird kind of racist imitations of Asia, which we'll discuss, what's known as chinoiserie, or what we sometimes call Orientalism. And ignoring the fact that there's both literal and cultural genocides going on in parts of Africa and the Americas perpetrated by Europeans. So there's a lot they're not paying attention to, but they're having a hell of a party while they ignore reality. Let's discuss. So one of the things about the Rococo is all about fantasy. Remember, we're ignoring reality in this particular movement. And Fragonard is a wonderful artist if you're checking out of reality half the time. One of his most famous paintings here is The Swing. And The Swing is, in some ways, Fragonard, dare we say, his most obnoxious. The Swing is one of these garden scenes. We'll see a lot of these garden scenes popularized by Watteau in the Rococo. And he's got the woman with the one man pulling and pushing her on the swing, the other looking up her skirt as she's like, woo, and one shoe flies off. Now, The Swing is a perfect Rococo painting in a lot of ways, because not only does it have this weird fantasy play element with the gardens going on, but it's moving away from some of the stricter symmetry. It's got much more pastel tones than anything in the Baroque did. All those flowers and gardens are very Rococo. And Fragonard is easy to look at as, frankly, kind of a ditzy painter. But his color work is pretty impeccable, and he's known for the beauty of his brush strokes. So don't get completely annoyed by the action if you're not paying attention to this lovely misty landscape he's managed to have going in the background. Now, a painting with almost no redeeming qualities except the beautiful shades of yellow that we see in a number of Rococo paintings. Yes, I said almost no redeeming qualities. Is Fragonard's Girl with a Dog. And heaven help this planet, they actually printed this on a purse a couple years ago that Louis Vuitton sold for several $1,000s, and I can only imagine. But this is Fragonard's Girl with a Dog, which is a great example of how the Baroque often looks for escape from reality in weird, erotic ways that are in horrifically bad taste. I don't usually say that about paintings, but we have the woman with her bare bottom in the air, and then the naughty bits covered with her little dog tail. I don't even know, man. The Fragonard works, and a lot of the Boucher works, who we'll look at in a minute, these works often have this tone of eroticism, and it's interesting because there have been more than one individuals who said, how much of this is fine art because of the master hand that created it, and how much of it is just soft porn made by someone talented. I guess with the dog covering it up, it's less X-rated, ? So, like I said, Fragonard comes off flaky, but I wanted to show you some of his more serious paintings. Fragonard painted an obscene amount of work. He's got more than 500 paintings. Yeah, and incredibly accomplished etchings. So I want to show you the stuff he does that's a little more serious, so maybe you have more of appreciation of him as an artist. In particular, his Young Girl Reading, which you see here, has that fabulous yellow. And if you look at how carefully he's blending colors to get the tones and the shading right, it also lets you know he does occasionally see women as more than random naked art pieces. And in fact, one of the interesting things we know about Fragonard is that his wife did painting, particularly of miniatures. His father-in-law was a painter, and one of his sisters-in-law, his wife's sister, was a very successful female painter, Marguerite Gérard. And she chose not to marry because she wanted to maintain her career independence as a painter. And so he invited her to move in, and she lived with her sister and husband because they respected her professional ambitions. So more enlightened than we give him credit for, Fragonard. This is one of the pieces that I think shows that landscape with this, like the swing, without the raunchiness to distract you. And this is Le Petit Parc, right? The little park in English. And we can see some of what he's playing with in terms of landscape ideals. Notice much softer light, not those dark, intense Baroque-style chiaroscuro, right? No super scary, freaky shadows. And not quite symmetrical either. We're moving away from that. You also notice more and more of these curved lines, especially as we get into architecture. Okay, so we did Fragonard. Let's talk Boucher. If possible, Boucher is an even more questionable taste, bless his heart. And Boucher was the favorite painter of Louis XV of France and his mistress, Madame Pompadour, who was one of the great tastemakers of the mid-1700s. And Francois Boucher actually was made fun of for a good 100+ years for his questionable taste, but at the time he was wildly popular among a number of French aristocrats. In particular, he had a lot of scenes like this. Delicate, gentle love play between someone who's supposed to be a shepherdess. Does not look like she's ever herded sheep in her life. Look how clean and fair her complexion are. Look how dainty her feet are. Shepherdess who works barefoot with a pedicure. Oh, being fed by her lover. Yes, these are what we call pastoral scenes, a lot of them based on super cheesy comic operas and plays that were popular at the time. And lovers in the woods that involve shepherds and shepherdesses, wildly popular. But although these are not my favorite, personally, what upset people so much were his naughty nudes. This is one of two what were called odalisques. And odalisques are the first example we've seen of what today we call Orientalism, which is creepy racist ideas about Asia and the Middle East Europeans stick in their art. So odalisque is a word we use for a female harem attendant in the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman rulers and nobles would sometimes keep what were called harems, which is where their family life would be kept separate from visitors. And so wives and children would be in their own part of palaces. And this really got Western imaginations going, particularly if they'd never been to the Middle East. And they had these incredible fantasies about lots of naked women sitting around doing kinky things. This is not actually the way harems worked at all. But remember, this is a period about fantasy. And because they don't understand this part of the world, Western artists just sort of superimposed their weird fantasies over it. So odalisques are supposed to be harem attendants, and for whatever reason, in Western art, they're often naked or partially naked and stretched out, because apparently being a servant for female family members involves laying around naked. At any rate, this is one of two. There is a blonde and a brunette. And the brunette, who you see with her rump exposed, is Boucher's wife. Yeah. The fact that he's got his wife half naked with her fanny up, at the time, a lot of people thought was scandalous. They literally said that he was prostituting his wife. Most famously, this really upset the Enlightenment philosopher Denis Diderot, but Diderot wrote political pornos, so I'm not sure he's in a position to judge. At any rate, this is Boucher. Maybe a little less talented when it comes to sheer art than our friend Fragonard. This is Lancret, who gives us a great example of some of this partying going on. This gives us a dancer from the 1700s, what we would see in place of, say, a modern ballet artist. Here we have her dancing outdoors. Notice that same soft light, right? The plants, the flowers, very delicate, fabulously Rococo here. And actually, this is one of my favorite pieces because it gives an idea of how hard we're partying as we ignore our impending headlong collision with reality in the form of American and French revolutions. It's literally called the ham lunch. So you will notice the ham in the middle of the table, déjeuner, lunch at the time in French. And notice we have everyone absolutely schnockered and one of them standing on the table with a crown on. Dogs eating broken plates. Wonderful example of drunken excess. We also have our first, maybe one of the only today, people of color in the margins here, dressed in a sort of turban and with a napkin over one arm. We'll talk about the absence of people of color overall in art during this period, because they certainly existed in Europe, and they're noticeably absent in the art, and when they are, they're shown in strange ways. But wonderful example of roaring, creepy party. No wonder these people are about to get themselves guillotined. Probably the most emotionally poignant of all these Rococo partiers is Jean-Antoine Watteau. And Watteau doesn't need to be emotionally moving, but he has this wonderful sort of beautiful vulnerability going on. Again, we have this soft, slightly blurry light, this play with pastels, and Watteau is famous for pioneering what we call the fête galante. So he was the first of these artists, notice these are in the teens, not the 30s or 40s like some of our artists above, to have all these people out playing in gardens. And that's really what the fête galante is. Fete, new word, GALANTE. Fête galante. Now, one of the things he particularly shows are commedia dell'arte, Italian play characters, we'll say. And these traveling Italian plays were incredibly popular. Notice under the title, you'll see Harlequin and Columbine. Columbine is the woman going, "Oh, you scared me." And Harlequin's the one going, "Ha ha, I am wearing this ridiculous diamond pattern suit." He is the sort of prankster, trickster in this commedia dell'arte, this traveling cast of characters. And you see naughty Harlequin up to all kinds of things. Here he is going after the girl in the woods. A little bit scary, but a lot more playful. Not as terrifying as that sounds. Instead, more flirty, startle someone scary. Not like creepy predator, axe murderer. Okay, maybe scary was the wrong word. At any rate, I want to talk to you about my very favorite Watteau painting before we wrap up this section of video. You'll see this sometimes called Gilles, after the man supposedly wearing it, or you'll see it called Pierrot. Pierrot was the tragic clown in the Commedia dell'arte, this cast of Italian play characters. And Pierrot always loses the girl and ends up sad. He's inspires the future sort of crying clown. And many interpretations of this painting believe that Gilles here has shown up for a party. Notice everyone's clothes in the background and his own. And he's got on his clown costume. It doesn't quite fit though, and his look of sort of awkward vulnerability on his face, feeling a little goofy in his costume, is I think what makes this painting amazingly moving, at least to me. There's something about his expression, his did I wear the right thing? Do I look like a nerd? The whole posture is beautifully done. And that, just like Harlequin and Columbine, that emotional undercurrent is what gives Watteau's paintings a sort of depth that a lot of these other paintings don't have.